Trustee Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I really appreciate it. Can we go back to the screen where you had the CVAP for the Latino, Asian, and African American, please?
Yeah.
And CVAP stands for,
Citizen voting age population. So it's a metric from the US Census that determines the uh, adult population. It's used as a proxy for eligible voters. Now, it's not truly the eligible voter population because it doesn't differentiate between people who are institutionalized or in prison or don't have their voting rights anymore. But it is a proxy for that that's utilized in the districting process.
and because we got a lawsuit that made us go through faster for this program, and it labeled the Latino X population. But since we're doing it anyway, do we also have to take into consideration the Asian American and the African American population as well too?
Yeah. So when you're launched into a CVRA conversion, I think it is important to be respectful of the fact that why are we here? Like, who was the community that had the concern? As an example, when we were doing redistricting in Santa Ana, it was the Vietnamese population that put them in a CVRA situation lawsuit. And so there was definitely a cognizance of like, hey, here's a community that is expressing an inability to elect candidates of choice to the board. And so let's make sure we're not doing something that is clearly an affront to that viewpoint and to something that's obviously driving the community to get engaged. So there's that. But then the other thing is that once you find yourself in a districting process, you have to follow all the laws. So you still have to look at it from scratch and say, well, what are our potential vulnerabilities to a federal Voting Rights Act claim? What are the populations that need to make sure that they're being respected in that way? And you might, as an example, in this situation, find yourself drawing districts that are API, Asian citizen voting age population, strengthened populations where they're going to clearly be drawing districts that will allow for that community to elect a candidate of choice. And then there might be other areas where a district is maybe not majority minority Latino, but where you do have a community of interest that comes forward and says, hey, we all, work cohesively, we vote in a cohesive manner, we represent a certain socioeconomic, ethnic, workforce kind of population, and we want to be protected in a district. And then you end up drawing districts that protect that group as well.
So typically, when I see a community of interest, and I've done this before, usually people will say like cities or school districts or elementary school district, please keep us intact, because we're aimed at Latino X and the population that we should make sure that they are represented. They're mainly located in North Mountain View and North Sunnyvale, which happens to have two school districts that go with them. So would we be like trying to keep those school districts intact, or will they be divided up since most of our Latino X populations just happens to be located there based on past historical patterns?
So in redistricting, the idea is to empower local communities to be able to elect a candidate of their choice by trying to maximize their share of a district that you're drawing with that community of interest in mind. So if you say, hey, there's a community of interest up in this area and it's heavily Latino, and conveniently it follows certain patterns along the lines of where the school districts are, then you've got a potentially an opportunity, and having not drawn the map, so I'm just speaking abstractly, you potentially have an opportunity to say, hey, let's draw a plan, or even ask us, hey, redistricting partners, can we do one version of the plan that keeps these two school districts together? And we'll look at it within the balance of all the other criteria. If I come back to you and say, hey, we kept those two school districts together, but it was only 12% of a district, it really didn't have that much population, then it's clearly not going to be like its own district because it violates the other criteria. But if we come back and say, hey, we were able to draw this district, most of it is comprised of these two school districts. We also have this other slightly different part, but we chose a part that we have community of interest testimony from the Latino community that they want to be drawn with these other school districts. then you're in a perfect situation to be able to say, we drew a district that was respectful of the Latinx or Latino or Hispanic population. However, we generally use the word that's in the data set. So in the census data set, it says Hispanic and Latino. In 2011, it used to just say Hispanic, but we'll be able to create a district that's Hispanic and Latino CVAP certain percentage. And the primary reason we're drawing this district is because of these underlying geographies of underlying school districts and the community of interest testimony. So you're doing this in a way where you're empowering the community. The flip side, sometimes in redistricting, people will say, hey, there's this Latino community. We want to make sure that more trustees represent this Latino community, so let's cut it into 5 pieces. That's not how redistricting works nowadays. That would be considered cracking the Latino population and drawing districts that ultimately end up disempowering that community.
And my last question is that while we're waiting for Census 2020 to be tabulated, and we might be as early as September or even later, what other websites that has historical data that we can take a look at other than the US Census from prior? Would something like Statistical Atlas be a credible website to take a look at historical data? And can you recommend any other website that has historical data that we can take a look at while we wait for US Census 2020 to give us in September or later?
Yeah, so the 2 data sets that we have right now is the 2010 population data and the current American Community Survey, the American Community data. That ACS data actually is the final data set we're going to have for redistricting. And that's the data set that defines the ethnic population. We talk about, oh, the census is late, and it is, but there are actually 3 data sets that we use in redistricting. The first is the census geography. There's 500,000 little census blocks all around the state, and we actually have that new census geography. So that's not late. Then there's the ACS data. The ACS data was released in February. So that data is not late. We actually have the final ACS data set for the district. So when we say it's 35.1% Asian, that's not changing. That's the final data set. The third data set is the PL file, the actual redistricting decennial file that'll be number of people in each census block. That will allow us to determine the total population of the district and the population of each trustee area. And it'll allow us to start drawing lines. So we have to wait for that for a little while. Other data sets that we could look at, I think the challenge with the ones that you mentioned is that generally those are more aggregated data sets and they don't necessarily draw down to like the census geographies. So they're too large. You might be able to say Cupertino is X% Latino Asian, but it doesn't say where in or how it relates to the rest of the area.
Understood. And you said the census geography is already out and the ACS is already out. Are those public documents that you can send us a link to?
They're not that kind of a file. They would, I mean, you would never, unless you have a GIS program, you wouldn't be able to actually utilize them. We have them in our systems, and when we create a online tool for doing redistricting, we'll utilize those. Yeah, they're crazy complicated, but they are something that we have on the vendor side, and it's something that we would be putting into the online software.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and to also add to that, as we're doing this districting process, if additional issues come up, let's say, as an example, we did the redistricting in Davis and somebody said, hey, the student population uses these bus lines. Can we get a map of these bus lines? And literally somebody from the campus gave us a list of the bus lines from UC Davis. We were able to superimpose that on a map and show that so that the council had a sense of like, oh, okay, that's where that community is. And there might be things like in LA, they have the LA Area Homeless Services Authority that has mapping that we've done actually years and decades ago. They have mapping of homeless populations that we could lay on top of the existing mapping software to help highlight that. So additional data sets can be used. What's really critical is to try to get them in a GIS format, and we can generally reach out to other agencies to try to get that.
Thank you, Mr. Bichel.
Patrick, did I see your hand?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Paul. I just want to say I really appreciate you working with the district. This is obviously a very complex and important issue, not only for our district, but for the law. So just wanted to publicly thank you, and making sure as we go through the start of this process, like you outlined, the many things that we need to be following to ensure that we come up with new district lines, and may very well be new board members in the future because of these lines being drawn. So I just want to make sure that the community is aware that as we go through this process, that's kind of what it may result in. And also just really appreciate your level of expertise in partnering with us to ensure that we are doing our due diligence to follow the law, and reach out to our community members so we can be representative of the communities that we represent. So I just wanted to thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for working with us. We're excited to be working with you and with some other local governments in your area. So
Absolutely. And looking forward to our continued discussions. I know that we're going to have at least a minimum of 5 meetings about this. And so really appreciate that. Thank you, Paul.
of course, and we will also have Sofia Garcia participating in some of these outreach hearings, bringing her other experience. So you'll get to see more than just me.
Wonderful. Please thank Sophia for us if she's not on the line
Of course.
already.
Gracias.
Yes, thank you, Paul Milcho, for your presentation. You mentioned that we have to wait and see before we get seriously started on this process for the legislature, the courts, the census data. And now you just mentioned that the census data, we have enough information to go forward without completely waiting for the census data. But what about the court and the legislature? Is there a key court cases that we're waiting for, or decisions, legislative bills? I know of a case in Los Angeles with Santa Monica, the city of Santa Monica. There's a huge lawsuit there, and I think it's up before the Supreme Court now. So is that the case you're talking about, or are there other court cases?
No, but the Santa Monica case is a key case within the California Voting Rights Act. Remember how I said that in federal law, they have that majority minority, and it's a real bright line as to what is required if a district for an agency to go to districts. There's a lawsuit in Santa Monica that has to do with the lack of a real bright line in California with that ability to influence and what that means. And essentially one of the courts had a decision that I'm told is non-binding on the rest of the state. So I don't know what that means really, because I'm not an attorney, but they were in that case saying, well, since you don't have a metric on what is the ability to influence, we think you should just have the same majority minority metric. So that case is going through the courts, and it will determine for some agencies that might not be able to create majority minority districts that they wouldn't have to convert under the CBRA. But I don't think a lot of people believe that decision will go in City of Santa Monica's favor. The lawsuits I'm talking about and the timelines I'm talking about are largely around the legislature might move the primary. They might shorten dates for filing. They might, right now, California law is that the redistricting process for agencies that have primaries is set for December 15th. They might move that date. The state Supreme Court already moved the date for the statewide redistricting commission to February 15th. So there might be some moving of that date for agencies that have primaries to have their redistricting done. And we might see dates move for all agencies if, as an example, they say, well, counties only need the data 60 days before the election. And so therefore, a redistricting data set for November can be delivered in September as opposed to being delivered in April or something. So those kind of things are what I'm essentially pointing out. And that if the legislature doesn't change some of these deadlines, it's possible that some cities or counties would band together and do a court case similar to what the state legislature did to give them relief of some of these deadlines and to force counties and the state to move those deadlines a bit. And we're not going to be in a situation where we're starting any of these lawsuits, but we will be in a situation where we want to be aware of them and cognizant of them as they go through the process.
So taking that into consideration, when do you think our district will commence seriously discussing and moving towards these hearings? And will it be after September, before September?
It's really up to your discretion. You have to be done by April 29th, I believe, based on the agreements that you've made. So that seems as though it's your finish line. If you started in the summer or fall doing outreach hearings, just to get the community engaged, that would be up to your own discretion. If you said
What
we're
would-
going
what
to
would
wait
be your
until,
Your recommendation, what would be your recommendation as a
yeah,
person involved
I don't
in-
want to put my thumb on the scale too much, but I'll say that my concern might be that if you started too early, you might lose the attention of the public, and you might be in a situation where you're feeling yourself too pressured by this late census data and when you can get started. It might be easier to find a window of time that's maybe 4 months between January 15th and April 15th in in 22, and say, well, this is where we're going to start and this is where we're going to end. But I'm comfortable with any of those. I just wanted to make sure you understood that you have the ability to make those decisions yourselves.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Right, Pearl?
Yes, Mr. Mitchell, thank you again for your presentation, for helping us get started on this whole process. I loved hearing about your credentials and working with other public entities within the state, and of course, our higher ed, many of our higher ed colleagues. And so I'm gratified to hear that. I had similar questions to Trustee Casas. Do you think then that we can complete redistricting by that April 29th date? And it sounds like, yeah, you've already kind of put out a straw kind of timeline. When would we see you again, or how do we interact with you as a district, I guess? Kind of all that bundled together.
Sure. So a few different things. We know that we can do the redistricting within the time frame from April 29th backing up for 3 months or 4 months, because in the CVRA, we're actually required to do it within 90 days. That requirement is on hold now. The governor's executive order and other changes have allowed agencies to have a longer time frame in a redistricting year to convert. But when we did conversions in 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, we were always doing them within 90 days. So we know that we can do it in 90 days if necessary. And then I forget what the other part of the question was.
When would, or how do we as a district work with you? When might we see or hear from you next then?
A few different ways. One is, let's say you wanted to get your website set up, have a redistricting section on your website, get a community of interest form on your website. Let's say you even wanted to have like an online software, any kind of those tools. We can work with your staff on helping to implement those things. And we could even come back and report to you in progress on some of those elements if that's what you'd like. We can also work with your staff if you're coming up with potential different timeline alternatives and just want some input. We can always help you on that. We can help your staff if they want to kind of come up with a community engagement plan and kind of shape that out and give you some suggestions. And normally under the contract with the foundation, we plan on presenting to the board in meetings like this 5 times. That would be your first 2 outreach hearings, your second 2 mapping hearings, and then we would probably just watch your last hearing, which is the up or down vote on the redistricting plan. We'd probably just monitor that hearing rather than really presenting at it. But if there are other instances where you need some input, want one of us to come present to the board, then just need to reach out to us. Otherwise, we can work anytime with your staff.
Okay, great. That sounds great. And I know that Chancellor Minor has been in touch with you with members from her staff. So I'm very confident that that will move forward. I just want to say, and I think that's an affirmation from the entire board, that we want to ensure and uphold the integrity of a fair, transparent, and open process, even though, as you had stated, even though we know it will affect each and every one of us, but it's ultimately what will benefit our district into the near term and beyond. So just want to reaffirm that on all of our behalf. Trustee Minor, I saw that you had your hand up too. I didn't
Yes.
know if you wanted to go next.
I did just want to say that, we appreciate working with Paul, and we've already had some tentative timelines. And now that we've had this presentation and some additional information, we can refine those, and we will work with him as to specific times. We will ask him to come back. The other thing, just to build on what you've just mentioned, Trustee Chang, about the integrity of the process, we feel very comfortable in working with Paul because he will be taking the direction from the Chancellor's office, and it would not be any individual trustees that would be providing any direction. So we just really want to make that clear, that everybody knows the whole process is surrounded with great integrity.